and welcome along to the Panto podcast. This week my guest is Gary Bridgens, or Gacko to his friends. He's a storyteller, a showman, a songwriter, panto writer, and has really forged his career recently in the world of pantomime as a phenomenal dame. Gary performs at the Richmond Theatre Royal in North Yorkshire, where they had the honour last year of becoming one of the Observer's top 10 must-see Christmas shows. Gary talks quite frankly about what life was growing up in a working-class town, how storytelling for children is the most important thing going, and his love of performing. Thank you so much for listening, and please enjoy the latest Panto podcast. So hello and welcome along to the Panto podcast. This week I meet Gary Bridgens. Hello, Gary.
Hello.
Yes, so Gary, how would you best describe yourself for people who don't know of your work?
I am essentially a street entertainer. I call myself a showman, and I have been for 30 years, and I largely spend my time in season. So I have a summer season, which is largely spent at festivals. So I have a cart, and it's a beautiful steampunk-esque cart, and it's crocodile skin, fake crocodile skin, obviously. No offence to alligators, and a lot of brass, and a beautiful old gas car lamp on the front, and it's essentially a box on wheels. And I lift the lid, and inside I have a huge collection of vintage old suitcases, which I collect, and inside those are various routines. So they're stories in essence. So I do famous fairy tales, I guess, but rather than the more traditional folk storyteller, of which there are many marvellous examples of, the roots of my influence are in music hall and in... I'm 50 years old now, so I grew up with traditional 1970s Saturday night telly, so the greats like Morecambe Wise and Tommy Cooper were my influences. So my style of delivering these stories is that world of variety and pantomime, I suppose. And I truck my cart around and I sing songs and I tell these stories, and usually to basking audiences sat on the grass having an ice cream or beer and wine or picnics. And I'll start with a single routine, and it'll draw more people. So people are naturally inquisitive about what the show is, and about a box, actually. Delivering a show from a box, people are always curious about what's inside. So that's how it starts, and before long I'll have an audience of anywhere between 5 and 500, and I can then turn that into a 40-minute show if I wish, or I'll just keep it simple, do one routine and move on. So I spend my time at Glastonbury and Just So Festival and Another Fine Fest and all those gigs, largely at weekends, and then fill my working week in various attractions. So then I work a lot at the Eureka Children's Museum in Halifax, so I'm doing weekdays then. So I have a summer season, very much like people used to do on the end of the pier, I suppose, but it's in green fields. And what's nice about it is I used to do a lot of local authority work, and that dried up a lot with the cuts. So, and at the time of the kind of arrival of what we now know as austerity, I moved into festivals, and festivals are very much freestanding. People buy tickets for them, or they don't. So that's my summer season, and then in the autumn I teach a bit at Cumbria University, and then of course it's Panto season, so mid-November through to mid-January is Panto season, and then I work in schools quite a lot, February, March, April, May. It's always a difficult time to fill, January, February, March, April. If you can crack those months as a freelance showman, then you're in for a good year, because the summer season and the Christmas season fill themselves really now. And it's great. And previously, when I was younger, when I left school, I used to work on nuclear submarines. I was the man that tested the nuts and bolts that hold together the core reactors on weapons of mass destruction. And that was my job. Each nut and bolt had to be tested and etched with a serial number, so they knew where the material had come from, and if anything went wrong with one of those nuts and bolts, then, well, presumably the world would explode. So it was my job to make sure those nuts and bolts were in good order, and I did that for 3 years, and then I became involved in a theatre company, and I left to be in a pantomime. I got offered because I always used to do it on the side. I used to busk. I used to play outside Barrow Market, play music for money. And I became involved in a theatre company called Welfare State International that were given to my hometown. I'm from Barrow-in-Furness, and in the early 80s, Barrow was mentioned in the Houses of Parliament as an example of a town that's a cultural desert, that has literally no culture, which wasn't true. There was a lot of music, and there was a certain... we had a strong societies... amateur dramatic societies that were very popular, but it was true that we were a cul-de-sac, you see, and so we were mentioned as a cultural desert. There's nothing in that town, and as a result we were parachuted enormous amounts of art. So from being regarded as having nothing, we had the Royal Shakespeare. Literally a fortnight later, we had performances by the Royal Shakespeare Company, the English Festival Ballet, the Halley Orchestra performed, and also this wild theatre company were given money to work with the disenfranchised youth, of which I was one. I was 14 at the time, and they made a film. They made an adaptation of King Lear. It was called King Reel, and it was written by quite a famous poet by the name of Adrian Mitchell. And they wrote the script, and it was shortly after Mad Max was made. And the influence, so their King Lear was set in this kind of post-apocalyptical background of nuclear devastation because of where we're from. And we were all recruited. A lot of my friends were glue sniffers at the time. It's something I never got involved in. I used to drink cider when I was a boy, but that's the kind of boys we were. We'd spend our pocket money on fags and drink cider, and some of my friends used to sniff glue. And there was very little for us to do. We didn't have, unless you were the sport. There was lots of sport, but there was nothing really culturally that we could get involved in, and we were all attracted to it because of the nature. Because the film was set, we had cars. We've got a lot of welders in Barrow, obviously, and they recruited guys to make wild machines and huge puppets on cars that would expand and blow up. There was lots of pyrotechnics, and we were obviously immediately drawn to it. And they came to our school. There was a very famous street entertainer. He used to be on Tiswas, called Marcel Steiner, and he had this thing called the smallest theatre in the world, which was a motorbike and sidecar. And the sidecar was the theatre. And he'd pull up. He used to perform at Covent Garden, it turns out. And he would pull up on his motorbike, and the sidecar was really tall, and it was separated in two. One half was the stage, and one half was the auditorium, and one person would sit in the sidecar, and the wider audience would watch in a ring, and the comedy was watching him preparing off stage to be different characters, and then going in and performing this shortened version of King Lear was the one I saw, and with him he had a bloke called Taffy Thomas, who's now Britain's storytelling laureate. But when I first watched him, he was in an act called the Fabulous Salami Brothers, who used to work the streets, and it was comedy and music. And they arrived in our school, and I'd just been sent for the cane because I'd been bad again. And in those days, they used to hit children with sticks in order to inspire them rather than bother to try and teach them. And I'd been sent to be given the cane, and the headmaster was having me. I was literally having my hand out when the door went, and it was this guy, Taffy Thomas, who was to perform a show in the playground, but couldn't find the way, and they had the motorbike and sidecar. And so he walked in, and the teacher kind of said, "Well, Bridgens, go and show this man where the car park is." And so I went out to the front of the school, and ended up sitting on the back of this motorbike with no helmet, which had a theatre attached to it, and I had to direct them round, so they then drove into our playground, and we were all sent out to watch, and I think the show took place shortly after the storming of the Iranian embassy, which we'd all seen on television that night, and they incorporated that in the show. So there was a whole scene where the SAS arrived in the theatre, abseiling through the roof, and we watched it as boys, going, "This is brilliant." And it was hilarious. At one point, he drove a 6-inch nail up his nose, which I think was part of his usual street theatre act, but he added it in, and a few days later we had our careers advice conversation, and what do you want to do yourself? And I said, I think what I want to do is I want to be a fabulous salami brother. And the teacher said, what's that? Is it you want to be a butcher? And I went, no, I want to do this act. I want to do this thing we saw the other day. And I said, well, as far as I understand it, they get paid to... The finale was a paving stone break, so he'd suspend himself between two chairs, put a concrete paving slab across his groin, and his mate broke it with a 12-pound sledgehammer. And I said, apparently that it's funny, and they get paid to do... I'd like to do that. And my careers advisor said, well, have you ever considered joining the army? I could see you as a heavy goods vehicle driver. And so I was hooked by that. And now that's kind of what I do. I'm in that world and have been for 30 years. So I quit Nuclear Submarines in 1988 because I was offered a part in a pantomime with this theatre company. And it was Aladdin. And we performed on a 52-seater coach, a bus. And they took the seats out. It was beautifully designed. The whole coach was painted. It looked very hippie. It was called the Lantern Coach, and it was beautifully painted like a canal boat. And the regular seats were taken out. Benches were put in. At the back end of the bus there was a stage. There was entrances through a skylight onto the stage, and I was cast as Aladdin, and the show was about 40 minutes long. And it was supported by whatever incarnation of the Arts Council, I suppose, these days. And the idea was to take theatre to people who wouldn't normally see it. So our tour schedule was dodgy estates in Glasgow, in Birmingham, really run-down areas. And I think they asked me to do it because I did lots of volunteering after the film, and I became more involved in... I guess I was a natural showman, but also I was from that world. So they employed some actors to be in it as well, who were kind of from a more educated acting background, university, I suppose, and who initially were very reserved about and scared. And they were quite scary places. But I felt really at home because I'm from Barrow. I'm from the docks. I was brought up in Uptown, Barrow-in-Furness, and the suspicious people we were performing to, it was a free show, so people would migrate, and the kids would come over first on the bikes and sniff out, asking if we were gypsies. That was the suspicion. What is it? Are you gypsies? Have you come to steal lead off the roof or sharpen? What is it? It's a show, and we'd play a band to welcome people on, and they'd come on and sit suspiciously, and then we'd do the show. And it was a tidy little show. It was funny. There was a beautiful UV scene where we turned the lights out, and we had a UV lamp when we went to the cave, and the whole inside of the bus was painted in hieroglyphics that weren't visible and people loved it, and it was a fine little show. And I had to make the decision at that point when I was offered the job. It meant that I would have to leave engineering, so I bit the bullet, and that's what I did. I went on this tour. So it was the pantomime and I'd never seen a pantomime before I was in one, because we never had them. At my local theatre, all we ever used to go and see at the theatre was wrestling with Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks, which in itself is on reflection is a pantomime. But I hadn't seen a pantomime until I was in it. That was, yeah.
How was that then?
Well, it was very different to what... the show itself was very differently imagined than what you would say the traditional pantomime was. It was a lot more poetry involved, a lot of music, a lot of political... It was very politicised. It was very political theatre. And it talked about... all pantomimes, all stories have morals. That's why they exist, I suppose. But the conversation that was... in that version of Aladdin was about greed, actually, and which I suppose Aladdin or Mother Goose still are to this day. They're all morality led pantomimes, or all pantomimes I think should have a point or have a philosophy or ask questions as well as entertain. You know, I see pantomimes, well, any theatre actually. Theatre doesn't mean anything if it doesn't have a point or have a point of view at least. So I just took it as I had nothing to compare it to, I suppose. So in those days, of those welfare state days, they were largely known as a celebratory arts company. So their theatre was large scale, bonfires, bespoke shows. They would arrive in a community and dissect what they saw, and then put artists with participants, and community arts it was called. And then they'd make a spectacle, so there would be a lot of engineering, huge puppets on cars that would rise up, and then the heads would explode, and lots of fireworks would go off, and then ultimately you'd burn the set down. That's the kind of theatre they were known for, and that's the first examples of theatre I saw was that. So in the 90s, they did a more the programme of work continued, and they did a more theatrical, because there was a lot of writers. It turned out there's a lot of people who were interested in writing. So the next phase of that project was to do more traditional theatre. In our theatre had been revamped by then. In those days, it was called the Civic Hall, and it's now known as Forum 28. It's still a council-run venue, and to launch it, we had this series of plays that were written by the community. They were steered by professional artists that this company brought in to work. We had a writer in residence, we had a musician in residence, and they were there to work and draw stories from the community. And I fell in love with the stage manager that they brought in. Me and her started going out. She was an American girl called Pam, and eventually left Barrow to go and live in London with her. And she took me to the National to watch a play. I think it's the first play I'd ever see. I was 21 by this point. And it was called The Miser. And it was a good play. And at the end she asked me what I thought of it. And I said, well, it was just talking. And she went, yes. I said, well, it was all right. And I think I enjoyed it. But I was the idea of theatre was so alien. That was my comment. It's just talking. That's all it is. And she went, well, that's what theatre is. No, there's no fire. We didn't eat anything. We didn't all get up and join in, or there was no music, and I didn't see an instrument. She went, well, that's a play. So when I first acted professionally in a pantomime, which it was, I had no expectations of what it was. My idea of theatre was this. It evolved from watching these street artists, these circus people, engineers. They called themselves Welfare State International Engineers of the Imagination, and they were a tribe of performers, artists, poets, visual artists, and makers, and that was their. So my evolution of knowing theatre, or knowing what a theatre play is, or what a pantomime is, evolved from actually being involved with it rather than ever having any viewing of it, I suppose.
You say about storytelling. When did that first make an influence to you as a child?
I was always told stories when I was a child. My mum, I'm from a one-parent family, and my mum always, I remember being read to as an early age by her at night. But she worked in a tobacconist, my mum. So I was brought up by a series of aunties and uncles that were actually not blood relatives. I was my granddad, my family are from Manchester, and my granddad lived in Manchester. So when our mum was at work, I was largely brought up by Auntie Peg and Auntie Marg. And because my blood auntie, my Auntie Lynn, she lived in Walney and also worked. So, and Auntie Peg was a retired old woman, and she was basically my mum's mate's mum. And her brother Uncle Bob lived there, and Uncle Bob was a great storyteller. He taught me Albert and the Lion, Stanley Holloway's. I could recite Albert and the Lion by the time I was 4, and that. Those are the days when there were 2 channels on the telly, and the telly was never on. They'd have the radio on in the kitchen. We'd sit in the kitchen and huddle around the oven. So I would perform stories out my Aunt Peg's back door. I made puppets out of paper bags, and I was doing shows when I was like 5 years old. Because I knew Albert and the Lion. I used to do a version of Albert and the Lion with a board across my Aunt Peg's back door for the kids outside. Well, my friends. So I always grew up knowing stories, and my son in turn, when he was young, he's 12 now, my lad. So I don't tell him stories at night anymore. But I used to. It was lovely. That art of telling stories and listening to them. It's commonly known that if you read to your child at bedtime, then their grammar and their use of vocabulary will expand. And I'm 50 years old now, and in those days, I mean, it's very easy for people these days, I think, to flick something on, and that's fine. I do it myself. I've got all the gadgets. So, I flick things on. Well, when I was a boy, you didn't flick things on. People told stories, and it might well be anecdotes, but families, uncles in families were great stories. My Uncle Rod used to tell great stories about life in the shipyard, what the apprentices would get up to, and tricks, and they were always hilarious. And that art of storytelling or passing on anecdotes was a lot more prevalent in my youth than I suspect it is now. So that ability to listen to stories and then pass them on, even anecdotally, is still storytelling nonetheless. And storytelling, as we know, is the oldest form of entertainment, after cave drawings, I suppose, or dance maybe. And that's something that's within us all, that, the reception, stories have a point, or a moral. We tell children Little Red Riding Hood. Yes, it's an engaging story, and it's great to see the wonder on a child's face when you tell them a story, and children love hearing stories. But you tell them these stories for a reason as well. Little Red Riding Hood is a great romp. But actually, in this day and age now, where we worry about children and rings of paedophilia and whatnot, we tell them that story. The wolf, of course, is danger, isn't it? And that's within us. That it's a need. We have a need to hear stories. The news is a story at the end of the day. And that's why I think pantomimes are so strong. They are there for entertainment, but they have. I think a good pantomime has a message and has something to say. Questions society, and the dame. I'm a dame these days. I started off as Aladdin, and as I've got older, I've evolved to, you either go for dame, or you end up as but old kings. There's a point where you approach, do you want to have a go at dame then? And here I am. But the power of the dame, to question things, and what I've learned, it'll be my 6th dame this year. And what I've learned is the dame is powerful, and you can do anything in the theatre, but also out of it. Quite often, for publicity reasons, you find yourself out on the street, where I'm very, very much at home. I'm very much at home on the street. I'm a street theatre man, in essence, and that character has respect. So when you're out on the street, if you go into a press thing or switching the local lights on, and you might well see a gaggle of drunk men outside a pub who might, hello darling, how are you? But when you go over to challenge that or join in, which you have to do, you have to face that kind of thing down. They know, if the dame comes over, they'll all step back and don't pick on me. It's a powerful character, and you can say things. You can change. You can, in the course of the storytelling, you change things. But the overall telling of the story or that piece of work, hopefully can have the power to, whether it be a moral and hoping that the children will learn not to talk to strangers, whatever that might be. There's a strength in it, and I would argue there's no point doing it if you don't have a point.
When you started off then as Aladdin, how did you become a baddie?
Well, I did a number of pantomimes. The following year I did Robinson Crusoe, so I was only 21 and I was just at that age. I did all kinds of pantos down the years and festive shows. I did the varieties once, and I was still like a young comic in those days. And then for many years, 20 or 25 years, I was partnered with a guy called, I'm known as Gacko on the in the street industry, and actually in the pantomime I'm billed as Gary Gacko Bridgens, which is my name. And Taco and I were a double act for 25 years, and he and I met on a pantomime. And we ended up in a band called the Pierrotters, and it was a Pierrot troupe. And it was a band that a group of friends formed in Brighton when they were at Sussex University, and they performed on the seafront in the summer season. And Taco and I met on a pantomime, and I was touring with Robinson Crusoe, and he was in my hometown doing a show which was also Robinson Crusoe, ironically, at my theatre. And I got back, and a mate rang up and said, somebody's pulled out of this pantomime, and it opens tomorrow or in a few days' time. Could you take this part? And I went, yeah, of course. And it was great. It was a massive, lavish production. Oh, we got friendly, and I was a drummer, and I can sing. And he said, well, we'll try to put this, then perform the band, the Pierrot troupe, for a couple of years. And he said, would I be interested in playing in this band? So I joined this band, and we played together for 25 years. And the other lads had kind of proper jobs, and he and I were both showmen. So we formed a double act, and it was called Puppets, and we did puppet shows, but variety. So it was a big. We started off as Punch and Judy men, but quickly realised that there's a lot of Punch and Judy men, and there's a lot of Punch and Judy men that are better than we are. And actually, so we did a variety show on the seafront. So we sold it to Seasides, and he's a pantomimist. He's never performed in a pantomime. He's a director and a writer, and he's very well read, and he's very. You should interview him for this. And he studied Grimaldi. He wrote an adaptation of Grimaldi's diaries for Radio 4, and then he approached the Georgian Theatre to see if they were interested in producing a staged version of his script. So he and I went to. I was in the show. It was a three-hander. There was Taco, Gacko, and Shabako. He was a bloke called Jake Rodriguez, who's a fine musician from the Isle of Wight, and the three of us were in this show about the life of Grimaldi. And the guy who was at the venue at the time, Vaughan Curtis, Taco, approached him and said, would they be interested in putting on a pantomime? And between them, it was decided that they would try and produce, because they'd bought in and they hadn't produced from living memory. So it was decided to take a risk, and so the first year, which was 10 years ago, we did Mother Goose, and I was cast as the kind of squire, the kind of lead comic. But the next year, they said, would you like to be baddie? And I went, yeah. And I approached, I hit that age where I went through my baddie phase, so I did 3 baddies down the years. And it was great fun. I used to keep a cry count on my mirror when I was a baddie. So if there was a show where... it's not the job of the baddie to terrify children, I don't think, but they should be challenged by the baddie, and they should be scared. And the first baddie I did at the Georgian, because I'd done Ebenezer in a different theatre years earlier, I had a sidekick called Garganto, who was a massive bloke. He was a bass man in an acrobat act, huge beard on him. And we had a gag where I would introduce my fearsome sidekick, and one of the children would come out, of course, and it got a laugh, and the audience thought it was a joke, but then out would come this monster of a man, lovely bloke, called Joe. But when he came out, and when we were on stage together, inevitably some child would cry, and I kept a count, so I'd have a little tick for each show on my mirror. I wrote in white face paint, and at the end of the run, I worked out what the tally of my cry count, and Bar, the MD at the Georgian, he's a really clever maths, and I'd got my maths wrong, and he tallied it up, and my cry count was 66.6% of shows that there was a crying child. which was great to have 666 as the baddies number. So yeah, my first baddie was then, you know, invited to, and I did three baddies. Great fun, loved it.
Preferred that over Dame?
No, it's fabulous being a baddie. It's great, and I'm really glad. The natural progression of a pantomimist is isn't it? You know, hopefully you're going to be the handsome young lead when you are handsome and young. I was never quite handsome. I've always been an interested looking bloke. But, and then, you know, naturally that's where you're going to go, and ultimately, you know, you'll get the question or the opportunity to have a go at it. Are you going to try your dame? I don't do nerves. I tried nerves on stage once, and it just got in the way, so I packed it in. But I was concerned about the dame, because I know my onions. I've done pantomimes for years. I'm a street performer. I know how to work audiences. But there is that thing, isn't there, that when you're... some people can be magnificent performers, but dame just doesn't fit. It's not that they are unable, it's just not right. And that was my fear, was I know I can work an audience and I know I could do it, but is it right? Will it fit? And thankfully it did, or it seemed to. It felt natural when I first did it, after the first actual show, and I came off and looked at myself in the mirror and went, right, did it work? Yes, it worked. But does it fit? You know, does the bra fit? And it did, and it felt right. And so I'm approaching my 6th dame now, and that is it, isn't it? There is nowhere to go after dame, and thankfully I've made it, and thankfully it feels right, and the audience, you know, that the relationship now between me as dame and the audience. I had to take over from our dame. The previous dame, the Georgian, was Dominic Goodwin, and thankfully we had the break of Cinderella. So when Dom hung up his bra, we did Cinderella, where of course traditionally there's no dame, so the audience had a break, and then when I came on as dame, it's like filling Alex Ferguson's boots, isn't it? You know, how they're going to deal with the Beric Kayla thing. I presumably, were I don't know the venue, I don't know the people, but were I them, that's exactly what I would do. I'd have a break and give whoever it is that has to make that transformation a chance. You know, give the audience a year without him, her, so that whoever comes next doesn't have to inherit that so immediately. I've got my the day I either get asked not to do it anymore or for whatever reason can't, I've got my outro already. I would like to do a Doctor Who outro, so if I know in advance that I'm not doing it again, I'd really like to hand over to whoever it is taking it, in that, you know, like where Doctor Who transforms and fire comes out of his hand. I'd really like to do that whenever my last night is, to go behind a screen and have that effect, and then the next person who's inheriting that come out and take it, because I think that would be the only way to pass it over. So I had to do that. I had to. Dom was he's into running now, Dom, and he's half the man he used to be. He's fit as a fiddle, but he was a big, lovely man, a really massive personality, great voice, great singing voice, and a really deep caramel, lovely voice, and I had to go on and take it over from him, and it was fine actually, because the audience knew me anyway. They'd seen me before, and now of course that's it. You know, it's mine, and it feels right. But it was a big, you know, it's a big question of yourself. Does it feel right? And it does feel right.
How did you find your dame then? Was there much preparation for the look,
yes,
for the voice, for the
there
mannerisms?
was. Yeah, I considered it a lot. I spent a lot of time pacing up and down, trying voices. It's an my kind of dame character is an extension. I'm not a trained actor. I never went to drama school, so I don't have that skill or that desire to change myself. So I needed a starting point, and that was really. I always knew I didn't want to be a Danny LaRue-esque dame. I'm not particularly glamorous looking, so I didn't want to do the kind of hello darling kind of dame. I was always going to be the bloke in a dress. So my inspirations really were Les Dawson and Barry Humphries, actually, that kind of naughtiness. I'd worked with Barry Humphries before, and I used to be a flyman in the West End, and I did a show with Barry Humphries and watched every night from the wings. It was the show I left on, actually. I left halfway through it. It's the only show I ever remember working in that theatre. I worked at the Haymarket for 9 years on and off, and every night between, we'd have long runs. We'd have 9. Look, we had a lot of long runs, 9-10 month runs. We had PlayStations in the crew room, and so we'd go off Sega Mega Drives. We'd go and play video games between cues. Sometimes you'd not do anything for an hour. But Barry Humphries, nobody went to the crew room to play video games. Everybody stayed and watched. He did Les Patterson in the first half and Dame Edna in the second with a musical. So I was able to, watch as a showman, even though I was pulling ropes in that incarnation, to be able to watch one of the greats every night was really interesting. So you would be influenced by, if you watch Dame Edna every night for 3 months, you can't help but be inspired by that. So yes, I did think about it. I thought about it a lot. I'm quite lazy sometimes with work. I'll kind of, if I'm putting a routine together, I'll get the bones of it and go out and try it. I've always worked like that. When me and Taco put the puppet show together, we'd have the source material, but we'd go out and do it, thus getting paid. We cut our teeth busking, putting the hat down. Which I really miss. I really miss busking. There's nothing more honest than busking money. And now it's all fees and checks, which is great for the mortgage. But so that was the starting point. Les Dawson and Barry Humphries and Taco, actually. He was my director, and having been in a double act for so long, I kind of arrived on the first day, looked at him and went, right, you're going to have to do this with me. And he's great. He's I think I said earlier, you should check him out, and because he's really well read and he's really experienced. And so we did it together, and then it evolved. It very quickly evolved. I got through the first couple of shows and get right. Okay, I know this now. I know that, and it was really my third Dame, I think, before I thought, right, I now actually know what I'm doing. And now I'm writing for myself. So this year I'm writing the show. So that's interesting. It's hard discipline not to give yourself everything. To try and from a point of view of a writer, which I am at the moment in these weeks, I write it from the position of I can see it on stage. I can see how it's going to work. It needs. Yes, it's had some laughs, hopefully. Actually, what it needs here is a bit of tenderness, and that you can have from experience. That experience. So when I'm writing it, I'm kind of putting myself there and seeing where the young company are and my imagination of what the set might be, and therefore I think I can spot the gaps. Whether they be fun, it's not had a joke for 4 lines. It needs something. This needs a sight gag. This needs a tumble. It's interesting.
And this from a storyteller's point of view as well.
Yes, yeah, because I find myself getting somewhere and thinking, hang on, I've just danced down a road that I can't. Yes, that's a nice bit of business there, but I can't do that. That's got to come out, because the story is the most important part, isn't it? If you can get the story, if the story is engaging and pointed and meaningful, then actually the conduit that surrounds it, whether the comedy is and the tragedy and the songs, because you got to plonk songs in there. When you think about what you're writing, actually, you want an hour and a bit first half. They start jiggling. Kids need to go to the toilet, don't they? After an hour and 5 minutes. Once you put 3 songs in the first act, then suddenly you're looking at 40 minutes worth of material. If anything, the trouble's getting enough but knowing that yes, it can't be an hour and 20 first half. It can't, otherwise people start shifting. And no matter how wonderful and engaging it is, there's a natural people get thirsty really for the gin and tonic. It's interesting process. I'm not at the end of it yet, and well, you'll be the judge of that when you see it. But I find myself giggling to myself when I'm reading it, and my struggle at the moment is I've realised there's not enough tenderness, there's not enough awe. It's got to be. It's a variety show, isn't it? A pantomime, and it's got to have all those emotions. It can't just be funny all the time, and that's my temptation. It's a crutch, isn't it? Comedy. It's something you always fall on, and actually, my trouble with my first half, and I'm just approaching the end of the first half in the writing. What I've realised is actually there's no tenderness. It's easy to plonk a song in. Oh, I love you. Yes, I do. Let's sing a lovely song about how in love we are, and that's great. But actually, there needs to be some genuine tenderness within it, and you shouldn't be scared. What I'm discovering is I shouldn't be scared of that, and it deserves its place. It should be a whole roller coaster of emotions, and it's easy to fall on the crutch of comedy. I think. I mean, of course, it should be funny, and hopefully it will be with and writing new things. Finding new. I think I've stumbled on a routine that I've not seen before, and hopefully it'll be mine. And it's the kind of thing where I'm a terrible magpie. If I see something, particularly out on the street, if you see something, I got taught by an old Punch and Judy man once when I was putting the Punch and Judy show together that his advice was, yes, I've got advice. He said, watch other people's shows, steal the best bits, make them your own, and that will be your show. And that is common practice. And I'm a terrible magpie for things. I do in my show. I do the Turtle and the Hare, and my telling of the Turtle and the Hare is with hats, and it's Tommy Cooper's hat routine, which is a fabulous routine. But I didn't just do his routine. What I did was I took the story of the Turtle and the Hare and introduced a lot of characters. So there's a whole kind of at the starting line. The owl said to the turtle, and I swapped the hat and I become all the characters. And yes, it's great when you perform to an older audience. Go, I know what you did there, and you go, yeah, it's Tom. Yeah, it's Tommy's routine, and of course it is Tommy's routine in philosophy, but it's my routine in its current incarnation, and I hope somebody steals it one day. And it's an accolade. I would regard that as an accolade. Somebody nicked I'm going to nick that bloke's routine. Then that's great, and I'm sure he would be very happy. And I haven't just stole it. It's an homage rather than a theft. But I think that's how things pass on. Laurel and Hardy and Chaplin are all lauded as magnificent performers, which they are, but they were influenced by. They learnt that they're regarded as the people that wrote the book, aren't they? Yeah. And of course they did in that new medium, but that material and that philosophy they took from pantomimists, and it was the pantomimists that fueled what was the emerging thing of cinema and film. That people studied that and looked like Buster Keaton is the man that wrote that book. Stan Laurel is the man that did this. Chaplin is the man. The Marx Brothers are, but they're not. They in turn were informed by their peers, and they were pantomimists. Pantomime is underrated, isn't it? I'm sure anybody who listens to your show, and it's often underrated as an art form and poo-pooed, and put in this thing of politics. It's a pantomime. We're going through this pantomime at the moment of Brexit. It's a pantomime. It's a bloody pantomime. And it's not at all. What it is a chaotic mess. A pantomime is something very different. A pantomime is very organised and very precisely worked out from the side, the cheeky sideways look when it's a naughty gag to a huge effect where somebody's life is at stake if it goes wrong. There's nothing more organised. I've worked in the West End. I've worked at the Sydney Opera House. I've worked for circuses. I've never seen anything that's more challenging and more organised than a pantomime. You know, when I worked in the West End doing plays, doing Oscar Wilde, it was people talking on stage with scene changes. And I worked on music. I worked on Les Mis. You know, there's that, press the button and the barricades come down. But a pantomime, I've worked on ballet. A pantomime is all. I've worked on circus. I worked for Cirque du Soleil for a tour, going around Australia. A pantomime is all of those things. Wherever you're in our theatre, it's a small theatre, but people get damaged, people get hurt. It's one of the most precisely organised art forms there are. So when you hear Brexit is a pantomime, the Prime Minister is a clown, all these things, yes, it's true in essence, but it's a complete mishmash of vocabulary. It's wrong, you know, ironically.
So for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about the Georgian Theatre where you're based now?
Yes, it's the Georgian Theatre in Richmond. It's the North Yorkshire one, not to be confused with Richmond in the south, which quite often happens apparently. Both ways. Sometimes they get whole groups of people who turn up to watch whatever's on in Richmond in the south, and they go, no, this is the other one. Your ticket, your seats are available, but they're 300 miles away. So it really is a unique building. It's the oldest theatre in the country. It houses a full house. In there is 170 seats. In its day, when it was a kind of 400, they'd stuff 400 people in there somehow. I don't know. And it's on 3 levels really. There's a pit, an orchestra stalls, and it's benches, and people sit on benches. And surrounding that, you then have a series of boxes, and they're all named after famous writers. So you've got the Shakespeare box that faces the stage, and 2 of the boxes are on stage, pretty much. So they surround you, and they're in little boxes. They look like chickens, kind of chicken coop. So it's a lot grander than I'm describing.
They hold about 5 people, don't they?
Yeah, you get 5 or 6 people, and then there's a back wall of benches where people lean across to look, and then upstairs there's a gallery, and then above that there's and it's all bench seating, so the audience get very close to each other. And in the early days when we first started doing them 10 years ago, and we started at the beginning building the reputation up. I think once we performed to 9. We did a show for 9 people in the first year, and it was great actually, because it was an elderly audience, and they knew their onions. They knew how to enjoy pantomime anyway. We were able to play on the fact that there was so few people. There were more people on stage that particular show, but it built very quickly, and the stage itself, I don't actually know the measurements, but it can't be. I'd have Tony would tell you. It's very small anyway, and the entire building is the stage is half the building, and it's exactly the same amount of length for the seating. It's very thin wings, no more than 4 foot, 4 or 5 foot either side. There's a piano store on one side where you can house the stage management team and gubbins. But it is a magical experience both for audience and performers. I used to before I was a dame and the baddie, I used to do pre-show, so I'd kind of go out and do that welcoming thing, and I always liked that because I got to play to my strengths, which is kind of interacting, but also it took the edge off. There's nothing worse than waiting behind a curtain for it to rise up and, oh, here we are, which is now the position I'm in as dame. I get that, but in those days you're able to see the audience first and become. So when you walked on, it was great. You already got a little cheer and a little clap because you'd met them in the bar and made a saucy joke about their nana or something. And what I used to really love most of all was watching people who, in that position, I quite often work the stalls myself and, you know, build the atmosphere in there. Seeing people walk in for the first time and seeing that place is very magic. It's like a chocolate box theatre. It is a unique experience. And seeing people's faces when they go in and go, because the exterior of the building is quite modern. It's been revamped, and So you wouldn't know, actually. It's like a TARDIS, you arrive, and it's quite a modern building with very modern bars and electronic tills and computer screens, it's like the National Theatre. But then when you go in and you arrive in this, it's the oldest theatre in this country, and a lot of it it's been, the fly floor is yes, it's the oldest theatre in its original form, and some of the hand painting on the boxes is still present. A lot of it's been preserved and has had to be repainted, but they have fascias. Next time you're in, have a look. So where it says Otway box, for example, you lift that up, and behind is the original painting, and some of the panelling is original panelling. So you've got 300 years, whatever it is, 300 years worth of genuine. So when you see those people's faces when they walk in from that kind of sterile, it's a lovely welcoming thing, but it is a modern day building. But then you go in and I see the magic. Kind of, you don't have to do anything before they're already having a good time.
One thing I did notice when you were performing was obviously there's no mics.
No.
For you or for any other members of the cast.
Yeah.
And we spoke briefly about it because you said you come from a outdoor performing background. How do you find with the other members of the cast? Do they struggle much? Or
No, I don't think anybody's ever struggled. It's easy. I've never been a fan of microphones. We never had them at the varieties, I don't think. All they have to do is crackle or stop, and for me, I hate them. I don't see why. The people that have them at the Palladium, these huge venues and stuff. Presumably, they never always had them at the Palladium. Those pantomimists of the past would never have needed a microphone. Those buildings are designed for it's like a church, isn't it? You go into St Paul's Cathedral, and you stand in a pulpit. They weren't designed with microphones. The buildings are designed to carry the voice, and the purity of doing it with that microphone is it's just so much. It's so much realer. As soon as it crackles or those things, it just destroys the moment. It's a bit like the film stopping for the adverts on the television. For me, it takes that all away. So I'm really pleased that the George. I mean, the George, it's purely for scale. You don't need microphones. I've seen so many shows destroyed. I went to see one pantomime. We all went for an outing to watch some colleagues in a venue, and whoever was running the sound that night literally wanted tarring and feathering because it ruined the performance for me because it was just too loud, and they didn't need a microphone, in my opinion. So nobody struggles. I mean, we employ a lot of circus people and a lot of our performers. We have what you regard as actors, which of course is great skill acting. But we also have a lot of street theatre people and a lot of circus folk who are used to working without microphones, and it's just a level of purity. There's a purity to the voice that's obvious to me. Where I can avoid using microphones, I will. I'm terrible with them. I keep looking at you, looking at me, not talking into the thing, and it's because I'm just
that's
not
the
drawn.
nature of the podcast, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I know. Hello, little machine. But that's great. Nothing can go wrong with it. I mean, the only things that can stop a pantomime. I've broke many things down here. Snapped ribs, broke my toe. People get damaged. We were talking earlier, weren't we? They're dangerous places. You're using everything, aren't you? Every trap door, flying pieces, move. It can be a very dangerous environment. That's why I think that we spend so much time crafting them, and it's just another thing that doesn't have to go wrong. If the microphones fail or you catch it when you're putting your hat on, or for me, as soon as I hear that crackle of electronics particularly in a place like the Georgian, it will just dilute the overall. And basically, you don't need it in a theatre that size.
Where do you think your anarchy comes from?
as a performer.
As a performer.
The people I was brought up in the 70s. I was born in '68, so I wasn't. My mum wouldn't. I wasn't allowed to be a punk. I was influenced by the Sex Pistols and the Clash, and that was the music I had when I was growing up. And the chaos of the Thatcher government. I was Margaret Thatcher stole my milk when I was a child. Maggie Thatcher, the milk snatcher. I was literally one of the children that had milk removed. So I grew up in the 70s and the early 80s. That's when I was a schoolboy, and they were interesting times. You had the Thatcher government, you had riots. When I left school when I was 15 actually, because my birthday's in the July, so I wasn't quite stuffed up the chimneys kind of. Children don't stop education now till they're 18, but I left at 15 actually. And my first job, before I did the submarines actually, was building. I was on a building site. I was on Margaret Thatcher's youth training scheme, the YTS. I was sent to, along with lots of boys. Builders could basically have boys. Go and have these boys, and you'd mix cement and sweep up and make tea, and government would pay me £25. And my first day at work, breakfast television had just started. And I remember watching the miners' strike, the battle for Orgreave, and those kind of battles between the striking miners and the police. Mounted police on a horseback. It was like Knights of the Round Table, wasn't it? The battle for Orgreave. You had miners flying here and there, and horses, and that. And so I'd have my cornflakes before going to work, and watch it. And there were chaotic times, and I'd spend my time going to demonstrations in London, playing in bands. I was in a drum band, and we'd be often asked. We were only young lads, and we were asked if we'd go to London to demonstrate against, fighting for the nurses or poll tax or all those things. So it was a very chaotic environment, and that thing of rebellion that the punk movement kind of brought, and that kind of suggestion of anarchy. I wouldn't regard myself as an anarchist. There has to be order. But that philosophy of rebellion and actually standing up and fighting for yourself and arguing and questioning were going on in my formative years. So I always grew up questioning and standing up for myself, and that moves into characters, doesn't it? That's the strength you have from being able to form an argument and stand your ground and not be. I was never somebody who was particularly interested in throwing bricks but we would write songs and chants, and that was always interesting. I was never a rioter or anything. I'd never turn a car over or throw a bin through McDonald's window. That's not. I don't see the point in that. So I do see the point in writing a political song that isn't just you're horrible or I do that quite a lot. I write songs that are pointed, I suppose, or questioning, and I use music hall, those kind of influences to write those kind of songs. And there's a way of being I'm searching for the word. There's a way of having a point that you can use through music or clever songwriting, or that can have as much effect, if not more so, than being a vandal. And that chaos was in me from those days, I suppose. The schooling's quite an odd place. That thing of being hit. If you were out of line, somebody's going to beat you. I'm going to beat you into doing your maths. And it just doesn't work like that now. My boys at school now, and they don't. That kind of. If you think back to those days, we're about the same age, aren't we? Well,
yes, sort of.
There or thereabouts. But you will remember,
I remember the
being hit by sticks, and so that level of chaos. You only hit children with sticks if there's chaos. If there's no other way. We've evolved, haven't we, now, and people have arrived at the conclusion that actually to be an inspirational teacher and make a child want to learn is the way forward. You can't beat. This is a great story, isn't it? The sun and the wind are having an argument, and the wind is saying, "I'm stronger than you. I'll prove it by blowing that man's coat off." And So the wind blows, and then the man just zips his coat up even further, and the wind huffs and puffs, but he just does his top button, and the more the wind blows, the more he doesn't get what he wants. And of course the sun warms the man, and the man takes his jacket off, and it's a lovely story. But you know, in essence, that the point of that story is that, isn't it? So I mean, children do what they see, don't they? They become what they are, and I was a product of this chaos of the 70s, I suppose, and rebellion, and that, you know, it was very chaotic times, and that is in your fabric, isn't it, when you've been part of things like that.
How much of that do you bring into your Dame character now?
There's a lot of subversiveness is punk, you know. That measured chaos is everything about it, really. You know, there are moments of tenderness, you know, when you want the audience to awe. You're a conductor, aren't you? When you're a dame, they'll do what they're told, or what you only have to raise your palms and look at them, and if you're asking them to be sad, they will be for you, and if you want them to cheer, they will. And in that way, the Dame character is very controlled and very controlling. But then when you want to break that, you throw an element of chaos in, and that's punk rock, isn't it? You know, when the mayor's sat in the box, you know, the mayor is the grandest person in town, isn't it? The mayor's got the big gold chain on, and the mayor is,
look at me, yeah.
Look at me, I am the mayor, and as Dame, you can throw chaos into that. It's quite easy to go over and want to flirt with the mayor, for example. But also you can go over and question their politics, or talk about why, you know, without being rude. You can do what you like, and the people respect that. The local MP was in, lovely fella, really supportive of the venue, and his phone went, and I caught him looking at it. He's a great bloke. I've got his name. He's a Conservative, but he's a real supporter of the theatre, and he and his family come every year, and his phone went, and I decided not to, but one part of me wanted to take it and take the phone and go, right, I'm going to confiscate that. And it could well have been, the Brexit thing was going on. It was, I forget which particular deadline they were about to hit, but it was the red phone. You know, the phone, the bat phone. It was the work. And there was a part of me that went, right, I'm going to take that phone. And I could ring the Prime Minister. You know, I could, if it's a text from the Chief Whip, I could ring that person up and say, hello. Barry Humphries would have done it. So that would have been... But I decided not to. You know, I didn't want to embarrass him, and actually didn't know where it was going. But wouldn't it have been great? You know, he would have had Theresa May's phone number in his phone. I could have took that phone. I could have called her. And I decided not to. I chose not to. But, yeah, that kind of chaos, you can, you know, is possible. You know, if you get... I mean, it's a lovely theatre, our theatre. It's a very family... centred place. I heard stories this year about somebody throwing bottles in Belfast at somebody. It's a different game. It's a game I can play. I can play that game. We don't get that kind of audience. We don't get bawdy, really. Sometimes you get boisterous teenagers and Cub Scouts groups. And there's one particular group of Cub Scouts that come to our theatre, and somebody years ago obviously decided, oh, I know what we'll do. Everything they ask us to do, we'll do the reverse. So if you ask them to boo, they cheer, and they obviously talk about it on the bus. They say, right, oh, this is what we do, and it really winds them up. And a lot of people would see that as might destroy it, or
a challenge.
Yeah. Or the little swines. But I actually really like it, and it's great fun to play with it. And
is that like looking at them as the young anarchists that you possibly...
I suppose so. And there is part of it, you go, all right, boys. And actually, you know, there is a point you go, right, you've got to stop that now. Or I think Paul one year had to have a word. Paul, our front of house guy, who runs the box office. But that's their right, you know, and it's your job to respond to that. And that's the skill, isn't it? You have to You can't go too far. It would have been great to take the MP's phone, but I decided not to. But that's the skill, isn't it? You can't. You are very powerful, but when you're confronted and you've got to take that on, you can't. You can't rip them to pieces. You can't roast somebody. You can a bit, but you can't go too far with them because it becomes ugly. And actually, you become a bully. You can never become a bully. You can take it on, and you can. But it's a fine line. It's a fine line between becoming a bully and giving them what they want. A heckler wants to do it, and that's fine.
What about then? Any favourite heckles you've had over the years? Any dicey moments on stage with
dicey moments? Dicey moments. Not really. I've sometimes picked. I had a routine this year where I got a bloke on stage to do. We were doing Shakespeare. We did the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. I was, of course, Juliet, and I needed a Romeo, so I would invite a gentleman up and give them a few lines, and there was business, and there was a kiss, and the climbing of the foliage of the balcony, as soon as you come on and pick it, I'm already looking at who is it going to be. You want the biggest, beardiest, or baldiest person that isn't going to be terrified. Similarly, with a song sheet at the end, getting the right child is. It's important, isn't it? You don't want the child that puts his hand up first, too quickly, and neither do you want somebody who's too timid. You don't want to roast somebody over the coals. This year I picked a guy, and I think he had some kind of learning difficulty in the end. I think which I hadn't spotted or I hadn't realised, and I invited the usual fodder is to, I'll have you. Would you like to? And when they shake their head, go into the audience table, give them a round of applause. That's the great game. But I'd obviously picked the wrong guy, and there were some family people shaking their head. And getting out of that was what I didn't want to do was go, oh, I won't pick you then. So what I did was immediately go to the person behind him, it's you, and then deliberately not pick that person, to spare that kind of... the embarrassment. So I think the only danger it would have been something like that, I suppose, where you've made a mistake, and how you get out of it whilst preserving some dignity for the person that you found yourself in that position with, was the only thing that would really terrify me, I think. I've not had... I had a lot of people I throw Tunnock's tea cakes as our sweets. Were sponsored by Tonic. They send us boxes of them to throw at the audience. And one year, obviously a group, a gang of 30 people all decided they'd arrive with boxes of their own. When I threw my Tunnocks tea cake up got a hole through the lights, rained 30, 40 Tunnocks tea cakes back, and it was a complete surprise. Looking up, they came through the lights. It was like Star Wars, when they go into hyperspace. Yeah. And it was like that, and it was, what's going on? And I broke myself. I snapped a rib, fell down a trapdoor during a performance, and snapped it in half, which I'd never done. I didn't realise when you break a rib, you lose your breath. I was told, I can't quite remember why, but I snapped it. I fell down a trapdoor and snapped it on the tuning peg of a kettle drum, the kind of big drum. And I realised I'd hurt it, but then when the breath went, I was like, oh, I'm really in trouble here. But I had to. I was alone. I was alone in the pit. There's a small amount of cast, and when at the Georgian, and when you're not on stage, you're normally performing in a band or pulling some scenery around if you're not doing a costume change. And I happened to be in the pit sub-stage on my own, and I went down the shaft that the spring trap will travel down. So I didn't actually fall through a trapdoor on stage. It wasn't visible. I fell down underneath it on my own, and I snapped it in half. And that was interesting, because I spent the whole show going round looking at people who I was about to have a fight with or something, shaking my head, and they're like, what's wrong? I think I broke my rib. And that was interesting because it slowly got round. Tony, our production manager, was furious. I hadn't come and told him. I was like, I hadn't had a chance. You were over there and I was here. And Tony, our production manager, Georgian, he's a Barrow lad. We're both from Barrow, and he's full time now. And he was driving me to the hospital because the nearest hospital was North Allerton, which was like, and he's like, there better be something wrong with you. That typical Moravian male thing. And I was like, dude, I think I've broke it. And he went, well, you better be broken after all this fuss. And when a doctor ran his finger across, he pressed it and he went, oh, it's not broke, it's snapped. It actually snapped in half. I did that.
And did you carry on with the rest of the shows?
Yeah, I did. We re-rehearsed some of the routines. And when I went, Warnock was running the venue at the time. They were between artistic directors. And he was a member of the board, and apparently there'd been conversations overnight with maybe so-and-so could do it. And the plan, I think, was to close for a couple of days and re-rehearse somebody in. But I was like, no, I can do it. We just have to change things. And so I couldn't do a wrestling. I had a wrestling match with a puppet at one point, a bird puppet. So I couldn't do that, and I couldn't climb up to the fly floor to do my balcony scene. But the rest of it was... I mean, there's only throat, really, that should... You can break your leg, I think, and come out in a... If I broke my leg and I got wheeled on, I'm sure you'd get a kind of ironic, oh, aren't you brave? I mean, vocally, I think, is the only thing that can happen. If you rip your voice and your voice goes, then that's pretty much... You can't do it. But, you can soldier on with breaks and bruises and burns,
Have you ever missed a performance?
No, never. Touch Formica. No, we've never lost a performance. It's a very snowy place sometimes, is Richmond, and so it's a long run. I'm away for 2 months doing the pantomime, and I've got a family, I've got a wife, and I've got a son, and we don't see each other a lot because I can't risk driving. So, because if there's snow on the A66 or the 590 where I live, the danger of not getting back means that more often than not I just go and I stay there, and they're used to that. As a family we're used to that. They come over sometimes, but no, we've never missed a show. There was one of the lasses. She developed a quinsy in her throat. I don't know if you know about that. It was like a huge lump, pus-filled sac, and it was agony. And she, it was the year I snapped my rib. Actually, I thought I was a brave soldier getting on with it, and she went to the doctor and said, "Oh, you got this thing. It needs operating upon." And she said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, we're going to have to put a knife down your throat and cut this thing." And she explained what she was doing, and so she got the first appointment, and she was on for the matinee. And actually, I said, I thought I was brave, continue with a snap rib, but you've been operated on. She went, actually, it feels a lot better. But that's what goes on, isn't it? I mean, of course, there are things that can befall people, and there's now you can do. But we've never lost a show, and you go on with colds. And one year, I really started losing my voice, and I could feel it going. What happened was I got a cold, and I didn't rein it in enough. I've got a strong voice. I've got a reliable voice. I use it all the time, and all seasons. I'm always using my voice, so it's strong. It's a good muscle. But I got cold, and it started going. It started ripping, and I'm not voice trained or anything. And my technique, an opera singer saw us do the Pierrot show once and said, "How do you warm? Of course, we should have warmed up. We'd go out and have a fag and a cup of coffee with a hangover." And what I found myself able to do, because it was going and I was losing it, and I'm not trained, so I don't know how, it just kind of happens naturally, but I was able to shift how I use my voice to a different part of my throat or my vocal cords, and I started using, and it meant I had to sing songs differently. So Taco, who directed that year, he came back halfway through, and I was singing What I Want Is a Proper Cup of Coffee made in a proper cup of coffee pot. And it was different. It wasn't out of tune. It was a different take on the song because I couldn't hit certain notes. And it's because I'd shifted my throat. And as the other side recovered, I felt myself moving it back. It's interesting. I don't quite know. I've not studied the the voice or the throat, but I was aware of it. I was aware that I could do it, and so I've done that before. That was interesting. I might learn. I might ask somebody what that is, but it was an interesting understanding of my own voice.
So there's no warm-up routine you have at all?
Oh, I do now.
Oh, you do?
Now that I'm middle-aged, I actually do. I have to stretch. Claire Allen, who's our chief exec at the moment, she doesn't run the kind of warm-ups, but we started doing some this year, and one of the cast this year, Ross, was a boxer, and in the warm-ups we started doing press-ups, and I directed it this year, so I had everybody doing a little bit of physical warm-up because I had to do it, because I have to now, I'm starting to ache a bit and things are seizing, so I do genuinely have to do proper old stretches and touching my toes and getting myself working, and we started doing press-ups, and I was quite surprised when I was able to do 10. I did 10 press-ups and I was really chuffed myself. It hurt, but I did it. And then what we did, we added Ross and me. He was doing 40 because he was a boxer, but we started adding a press-up every 2 shows, and by the end of the run I did 35 press-ups, which I was amazed by. So I do now. I do warm up. We've always warmed up vocally and had a stretch, but the older I get, I used to warm up by going out having a fag and having a cup of tea, but I know I do have to do it now. You've got to preserve yourself. You've got to be able to do it, haven't you? Because that's when actually you do let yourself down, or things might start going as you get older. It's interesting feeling yourself. My eyes are going. I'm not going blind, but my ability to read is, my arm's getting further and further away, and it's all that aware of getting older means that you do have to try a bit harder and prepare more. I wish I had gone to university maybe and learnt those skills, but I'm finding my own way. I know my body. I know how when it's going wrong, and I think I'm learning how to look after it more.
How important to you is pantomime at Christmas?
It's hugely important, isn't it? Pantomime. It's part of the expectation of the overall. It's as important as the Christmas dinner, isn't it? Pantomime. It's as important as presents. I suppose if you're a religious person, it's as important as the birth of Jesus, isn't it? It's Christmas crackers. It's the driving the Christmas Eve show. Just before you break up and drive home to your own family to have your version of whatever your Christmas is, it's quite an emotional time. Quite often I've not seen the family for a while, and you really look. That song's always on the radio when you're driving home for Christmas. And me and Tony drive back because he's from Barrow originally. He goes and sees his man, and there's a great sense of pride knowing that you've done that. Every show's the same, of course. I'm a great believer in keeping the energy for every single show, but that Christmas Eve show is the kind of FA Cup final, isn't it? Christmas Eve is the big show of the run, and once that's done, and you have the excitement of driving, the buzz of Christmas Eve is quite extraordinary, isn't it? It is FA Cup final day. It has that Olympics feel. The expectation is massive. The buzz in the air because the children, they're going to see this show. And then they're going to go home and probably go straight to bed. So morning comes faster, and I get a little tingle thinking about having asked. So that kind of sense of being part of something bigger, So everybody's. I quite often think, that this country, you often find yourself one of the few vehicles on the road. Is driving home about 11 o'clock. The shop and the garages are closed. It's a really kind of apocalyptical. Tesco's, the 24-hour Tesco is closed when you drive past it, and the garages are closed, and everything's closed, and the vehicles start disappearing, and you think, actually, this country's full of people. A small number of people just like me have all done this thing. We've never met each other. But we're doing exactly the same thing, and it's driving home for Christmas, having been kind of Christmas makers, I remember when the Olympics were on, they had the Olympic makers, the volunteers, and they were kind of lauded like nurses. People had, oh, you're an Olympics maker, and they wore it as a badge of great honour. And we I suspect we have that. I certainly do when I'm driving back and think, yeah, I made that group of people. We made. It's important as the Bond film on Boxing Day, isn't it? Or the Queen's speech, if you're into the monarchy. And it's a really great feeling, and it really brings home the importance of what it is. It's a very important thing, pantomime. Again, we've said this, haven't we? Underrated. I believe it's really underrated. Pantomime. If you get a pantomime right, and it's very often a child's first experience of the theatre. It's very often the only time a family will go to the people who are not interested in theatre. They will go and see a pantomime. They won't go and see Shakespeare. Some families won't consider going to see Shakespeare, but they will consider going to see a pantomime. And as such, it's a big responsibility, because if you perform a good pantomime to a child and that child enjoys it, they might say, well, I'd like to go to that again next year. So you perpetuate your own audience, but also they might well go and see something else. They might go and see, I want to go and see that children's show at the theatre. They might grow up to go and watch a play, and that way it's a huge responsibility to the overall art of theatre and of culture.
So it's come to that part of the podcast where I like to ask people their dream Panto cast. So it can be whichever production you like, it can be wherever you like, and you can be in it, or you can be sitting in the audience, and the people can be alive or passed on.
Yeah.
What would you like to choose?
Well, I've very carefully considered this. I've listened to some of your past podcasts, and you quite often spring this upon when people say, I wish I had time to think. Well, I knew you were going to do this because I've listened.
Good, so, you've been listening. That's when they need to listen.
And I very carefully considered it, and what I found was it's very difficult. You spend more time being embarrassed about who's not in it than the people you've eventually plumped for. So I haven't gone for anybody who I've worked with before, because I've worked with many wonderful people, and so I've just gone for kind of people that I'm not in it, of course. This pantomime I would like to see. So Aladdin was my first ever pantomime, and I gave my Abanazar when I was in my early adulthood, and now I'm about to give my Widow Twankey. So I'll have done them all by the time this time at Christmas this year. So I've gone for Aladdin, and Dame wise, I tossed and turned around a few, but I eventually had to be Les Dawson, doesn't it? It has to be Les Dawson as Dame. I considered Dan Leno, but I've only heard historical accounts of Dan Leno, and the funniest thing I ever saw in my entire life was That's Life with Esther Ranson and me and our mam on a bath night on a Sunday, and they had an item about trying to draw people with the most horrendous laughs, and in order to draw laughs from people to gauge how horrendously high pitched or cackly their laugh was, they had a confessions box, and when they sat in the confession and drew back the curtain, there was sat Les Dawson, and before he said anything or even pulled a funny face, it was as soon as people saw him, they would immediately start these ridiculous laughs, and the audience would then judge whether. And he didn't have to do anything, and me and our man watched it, and I do remember wetting myself with uncontrollable laughter, and it was just because it was him. So Les Dawson would be my Widow Twankey. Aladdin. It was very difficult to choose, but I eventually went for Matt Smith, who was Doctor Who. I remember when Doctor Who was came up for grabs after David Tennant, and the whole buzz around who's it going to be, which celebrity is it, and when they announced Matt Smith, I was in a car coming back from a football match, and the whole car, we were all Doctor Who fans as well as football fans, the whole car was, who? And And he turned out to be one of my favourite Doctors. I thought he was a great performer, and I think he had that combination of comedy and ability to play a drama as well. I think he'd be great. And he wears a fez well. So I've gone for Matt Smith as my Aladdin. My wishy-washy, well, there's a million, isn't there? But I eventually plumped for Norman Wisdom. I'd like to see Norman Wisdom do my wishy-washy, presumably I'm allowed to direct this show. So Norman Wisdom is wishy-washy because he's got it all, hasn't he? Ebenezer, I went for Oliver Reed. I think Oliver Reed would be great. I saw him because Ebenezer's got to have that combination of fear factor and charm. There's charm, isn't it? Ebenezer, he's not one-dimensional, and Oliver Reed has that ability to strike fear, but also to take. Have you seen Funny Bones?
Yes.
Where he plays that Dolly character, where he plays at camp. I think he'd be amazing. So Oliver Reed would be my Ebenezer. My genie, my magical genie, would of course be Tommy Cooper. You'd have to have Tommy Cooper popping out, wouldn't you? The old lamp and using his magic. I can't imagine anybody else than Tommy Cooper. My princess, who could be that beautiful princess? Who would I love to view? Audrey Hepburn. I think Audrey Hepburn would be a magnificent princess in her Breakfast at Tiffany's era. If I can, presumably I can pick which era as well. She was a magnificently beautiful older woman, of course, but you would sell 1 million tickets just to look at. We talked earlier, didn't we, about celebrities and stuff, and sometimes it's a bit like a zoo in a pantomime, isn't it? If a celebrity isn't a pantomimist, it's a bit like wheeling out a zoo. But I'd very happily just sit and look at Audrey Hepburn, but I'm sure she would be magnificent as my princess. Emperor, the princess's father, Sid James I went for in the end. I toyed with many, but I think Sid James would have that kind of, you can't marry my daughter. I think he would be my emperor. Comedy policeman, you need a good double act, don't you? Only a fool wouldn't select Laurel and Hardy for that role. Presumably don't need to justify that selection to you or anybody. And of course the band, who's going to be the band? So I went for Spike Jones and the City Slickers. Spike Jones and the City Slickers. They wouldn't fit. Where we'd put all this in the Georgian? It would be, of course, the Georgian, the oldest theatre in the country, and my theatre would be there. So for Spike Jones and the City Slickers and the Pits, that would be a magnificent lineup. The question would be, would the audience spend more time watching the band or watching the performers?
Have to dig a pit.
Yeah, you'd have to dig a wider pit. Put them up on scaffolding. Yeah, the whole proscenium would house the band. But yeah, Spike Jones and the City Slickers as the band. And I don't think I've missed anybody out there, have I? Is there anybody absent? No. There's no handsome lead, of course, is there? There's no. Matt Smith, my Aladdin. So that would be my fantasy football, fantasy pantomime cast, and I would direct it and then sit back and enjoy it every night.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time and being part of the Panto podcast.
Thank you very much. It's an honour. It's an honour to be asked alongside such fine colleagues and fellows. Long may it run. I look forward to it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Cheers.